What's up, shark nerds? I'm Paul Clerkin, a shark researcher, and today we're going to talk about shark reproduction. Let's dive in. Okay, so parents, I think this is a really interesting topic. We're going to talk about fish and shark reproduction, how many offspring they have, length of gestation. But later on in the video, we are going to talk about shark hanky-panky. So if that's something you think is inappropriate for your child, I'll give you a heads up and you can end the video if you want. But first, let's talk about fish reproduction, which can be broken into two broad groups. We have live bearing fish that give birth to live swimming fish, and also egg bearing, which is where the mother lays eggs, and both have advantages. The live bearing fish, they're able to swim, they can hide, they can evade predators, while the egg bearing species, that's kind of more of an advantage for the mother. They can they just kind of can just shed those eggs and not have to house them in their bodies. And because of this, they can have a lot more eggs. There's species like mola molas, and they have up to 300 million eggs per time they spawn. So that is a 3, and then a 0, and a 0, and then a 0, and 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 a 0. That's how many eggs they have whenever they reproduce. So as you can see, I mean, that would be impossible for them to house all those eggs inside of them until they're free swimming. That's out of the question. The mothers can't do that, but they can lay a bunch of eggs and just hope that a percentage of them survive into adulthood. Although we can break it down into egg bearing and live bearing, these things are always kind of in a gray area in nature. Like, we have mouth brooding species, which I think is really interesting. We have species of fish, and they'll lay their eggs, but then they pick them up in their mouths, and they will keep them in their mouths. They'll take care of them. They'll churn them. They do this kind of move where they flip the eggs, and it keeps bacteria from growing on the eggs, and it also cycles in oxygen for the eggs, so they can breathe and they can grow. And after the eggs hatch, the mothers will continue to brood the little babies in their mouth. So it's really interesting. They'll hang out and they'll let the babies swim around, but then when something startling swims by, or there's something scary, the babies will swim back to the mothers, which will open their mouth and just hide in the mouths, and you have all these little eyes and faces looking out of their mother's mouth until the coast is clear, and they'll let the babies out again. And this kind of continues until the babies get larger, and they swim further, and they get braver, and they don't have to swim back with every little disturbance. And that is how they kind of wean their offspring out into the environment. Another kind of anomaly in the egg-laying world is the case of the seahorse, which is probably, let's face it, one of the ocean's more adorable creatures. So not only are they cute little seahorses, but they mate for life. They have their adorable little mating dance where, like, the male and the females court, and then they dance and they intertwine their tails. Adorable. And then they mate for life. On top of this, when the female gets pregnant, she deposits her eggs in the male, who actually raises the eggs to birth. And then once they're ready to be born, he just kind of births them. So he keeps them protected, and when they're ready to be born, he just kind of like puffs them out, and that's how adorable seahorses are made. So that is fish, but this all translates directly over to the shark world, where we have live-bearing species and egg-bearing species. So the egg-bearing or egg-laying species, they lay what we call egg cases, and they're not really just like an egg. They're kind of like a leathery envelope that just houses embryos as they develop. And because of this, the mothers can drop off the young in these egg cases, and they can develop on their own while the mother is free to go off and eat and reproduce. These egg cases have they call them tendrils. They're like kind of these little wispy things that keeps them anchored in one place. But they come in a variety of shapes and sizes, and the mothers actually can take them and anchor them down into the sediment. And this is the most maternal investment that we see in the shark world. On the flip side, we have live-bearing sharks, and they lay, between 1 and usually 20 little pups, and the pups are free-swimming sharks. I always joke about, like, what do you call a baby shark? I just call it a shark because they're able to swim, they can hunt, they can feed themselves, and they're just miniature versions of adult sharks. So whether they're laid in egg cases or they grow inside their mothers, sharks' energy sources come from what we call yolks. So a yolk is going to be the same as you see in a chicken egg. It's going to be a large, round, yellow sphere, which is really high in energy. And sharks actually have an umbilical cord that goes from their bodies to the egg yolk, and when the yolk sac is absorbed all the way, it's flushed against the body, and there's actually a little umbilical scar or a shark belly button. It lasts for about 1 week until it's no longer visible, but that allows researchers that see these animals to know that they're newborn neonate baby sharks. So in all aspects of nature, there's a lot of gray areas. There's a gray area between live-bearing sharks and egg-bearing sharks, because we have shark species that have eggs, but the eggs hatch inside the mothers and they give birth to live young. And there's also a lot of different kinds of reproductive strategies. We have species that are in utero cannibalistic, and this means that the babies will eat each other inside their mother's bellies before they're born. And at the end, although they only have one baby per uterus, it's huge. So it seems fairly brutal to have these little babies eating each other and the mother's only having one pup. But the chances of that shark surviving are much higher than a fish laying an egg. Let's talk about shark gestation, which is the period of time between when a mother shark gets pregnant and when she gives birth. And we have a wide range in the shark world. It can be anywhere between a couple of months, 6 months or so, up until 3.5 years, which is how long it takes a frill shark to give birth, which is the longest gestation in the vertebrate world. So it's longer than any other species. It's longer than elephants, which is kind of confusing because elephants, obviously, they give birth to one very, very large baby. So it's going to take time to build this baby, for all the cells to split, and it's going to take time for the mother to get enough calories and energy to make that baby. So why would a frill shark, which is much smaller than an elephant, take over 3 years just to make a baby frill shark? And a lot of that is because of environmental factors that are very different from what we're used to on land. On land, we're mostly worried about caloric constraints, energy constraints, but in the deep sea, because it's so dark and cold, there's also chemical constraints. So it might be probably not enough energy, and the sharks just develop these embryos very slowly, but also because it's cold, chemical and biological processes take longer. So even though there are some caloric constraints, just developing and growing a baby shark can take more time. So check this out. We know that eggs develop slower in cold water. And what we have seen is that some species of sharks will lay their eggs around underwater volcanoes simply because it's warmer and the eggs will develop faster. So it is dangerous to be there because these volcanoes can erupt and they would kill any animals or eggs in the area. But because the eggs will develop so much faster, they have a higher chance of surviving, because if you lay them elsewhere, they'll develop slower and something could eat them. So even though you're laying your eggs in an underwater volcano, it has a higher chance of surviving than laying it in another place. All right, so that covers a lot of facts about shark reproduction. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty hanky-panky part about shark reproduction. So this might be a good time to have your kids leave the room, or maybe stop the video if you don't think your children are ready for this part. So now we're going to talk about shark lovin'. So first of all sharks reproduce with internal fertilization. Some fish species, they reproduce with kind of like clouds where they mix the eggs and sperm. But all sharks have internal fertilization. And to give you an idea of how this works, you have to think about what do sharks have when it comes to genital, to reproductive organs. So female sharks, they have an opening called the cloaca, which is pretty analogous to other female parts. And then the males have what we call claspers, and they're not so much a reproductive organ as they are a reproductive appendage, because they're really a pair of furrowed parts of the pelvic fins. So they have pelvic fins, right around their pelvic region by their vent, by their opening, and they have the fins furrow up on each side, and they have like these elongated kind of stick-like appendages, which they use to transfer sperm from their bodies into the female's reproductive tracts. So how do sharks actually get to the act of mating? Do they fall in love? Did they know each other from high school? How do they find each other? And we don't really know. There's a lot of mysteries when it comes to shark mating because it's something we have to observe. And a lot of our knowledge comes from specimens, usually deceased specimens that we can cut open and look at. But behavior stuff like mating, we have to be lucky enough to just catch it on video or while we're diving so we can study it. And this happens once in a while, especially with shore species, ones that are close to the coast, and common ones like nurse sharks. And what we've seen is that during certain seasons, the females will attract males. And we don't know exactly how they attract them, but it's more than likely a chemical cue or scent that the males pick up on, and they will start following the females. So the females will swim, and the males will come right up against them, rubbing their snouts almost on the females' tails. And they will do this for sometimes minutes up to 6 hours in the case of basking sharks, and it can be just one individual male up to 25 males in the case of manta rays. And they'll follow the female until it's time to mate, and then the males will attempt to grab a hold of the females. And since they don't have arms to embrace, they will actually use their mouths, and they'll bite the females around her pectoral fins or gill area in an attempt to bring her to deeper water where they can copulate. If the females don't want to mate with that male, they will swim away into shallow water, and they'll even try to hide their pectoral fins in the sand so the males can't drag them out, or they will like turn their bodies away from the males. And this happens for about 90% of the cases, at least with nurse sharks. 90% of the mating attempts fail until finally a male is successful into taking a female out into deep enough water for them to copulate, and they either slowly sink, kind of embracing each other, or they will copulate in shallow water in the rocks. So that is how sharks meet, fall in love, and mate. And we covered a lot of the facts earlier in this video, gestation periods, how many offspring they have. So now we're going to talk about some of the weird facts about shark reproduction. And one of those facts is that it appears lots of sharks can have what we call multiple paternity. They'll have one litter of shark babies that have genetics from multiple fathers. So they've seen up to 5 different father genetic donors within the same litter. On the flip side of this, we have seen what's called parthenogenesis, which is very uncommon in the shark world, but it is where a mother has a baby without genetics from a father. We call it virgin birth. And there's at least 4 documented cases. All of them were in aquariums, so we don't know how often this happens in the wild, because if a shark is pregnant in the wild, you just assume that she mated with a male. But in all 4 of these cases, they were in aquariums where there were no male sharks present. So they've done genetic studies on the pups, and there's no genetics from a father. So we know that these pups are just reproduced by the mothers, and we don't know how common this is in nature. Another interesting fact is that female sharks can store sperm. We've seen them mating before they are reproductively mature, and they can store that sperm for weeks to over a year. And this is really helpful if there's a chance that they won't come in contact with a male again soon, if they're a deep sea species, or if they're segregated so they're not mixing, males and females. This way they can get the reproductive material they need and impregnate themselves over time as they see fit. All right, so that was our episode on shark mating and reproduction. Please let me know your favorite shark facts below, or if you have a shark question you'd like me to answer, put that in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe, and together we can make Shark Week every week.